Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another VCO Esports studio with myself, Ben Constanduros. Now, this week we have an apology to make. We have been neglecting a major part of the world of esports racing and motorsport in general, and through really no fault of certainly myself or any of us, because we all love a bit of oval racing, and especially when it comes to iRacing, there is such a healthy world of American motorsport, US oval racing over there, and of course they have their headline NASCAR championship each year. And so, whilst we are also making sure that you guys vote for the best oval racing driver in our Simi Awards, we also thought it would be appropriate to invite the effectively world oval champion into our studio this evening. Keegan Leahy? Leahy? That's about right, isn't it?
Leahy. You can
Leahy.
start with that
Okay,
though, that's fine.
nearly. I used to have a friend, I think in England you'd be called Leahy, to be fair, because he used to be spelt exactly the same way. Now, Keegan isn't an American. Well, he is an American, but he isn't from the US of A. A Canadian world champion in oval racing. Do you get much stick, firstly, for being Canadian and winning oval racing, Keegan?
I get a lot more patriotic pride from Canadians than I get stick from the Americans, so that's no problem. I'm definitely welcome in the series, so yeah, I can't say that.
It is absolutely awesome to watch such an incredibly tight championship throughout the year, such a competitive one, and such a difficult one to ultimately take the championship, right?
Yeah, it's an extremely competitive series. The cars aren't extremely difficult to get that last tenth out of, so it ends up with a lot of the drivers are very close on speed. It takes the top drivers to make some small differences in lap time, but really where the differences come down to sometimes is race preparation, so getting your setup just right, hitting your qualifying lap every lap, which is ultimately what led me to getting the championship last race at Texas, and then racecraft. Honestly, being able to make the difficult and aggressive moves when it comes down to it, but also pick and choosing your battles and you know playing a little safe sometimes. So, it's small
So,
edges, a game of little probabilities and little edges, and something I like because I like to play poker and that sort of thing. So I kind of treat it the same way.
and absolutely, it's very much the same philosophy. Why do you say qualifying so important? Because I thought over racing, it's easy to pass.
Well, yeah, it's easier to pass than a road course because usually once you get inside, the inside position on somebody, especially with how we have the side draft now, you can really pull people back and then just send it on the inside for the next corner and you're clear. But we also have the aerodynamic effect where the closer you get to a car ahead, the less downforce you have. So we have that turbulent, dirty air, we call it, in the corners. So you can get separated and it's tough to make passes on people that are close to your pace. So, now that's not to say it's impossible to pass because Logan Clampett, my championship rival from last year that I ended up beating barely, he started 34th, I believe, and we had no cautions. He drove it straight to the front, passed 32 cars, got up to second place, and was right on my rear bumper in the last few laps, pretty much. But yeah, it's qualifying is important, and I qualified second when he qualified 34th. I think he had the faster race car, so and he was driving really well as well. And I think that qualifying was definitely one of the contributing factors, maybe the reason I won the championship this year.
Strategy is a massive thing in oval racing. And how does it work for you guys? Are you doing everything yourself? Is it pre-planned, or do you have an engineer spotter that's working alongside you as a human rather than a computer?
Mhm. Well, I should back it up a little bit farther too, just to explain if anyone doesn't follow the Coca-Cola series or the real life NASCAR stuff. There's a playoff system, so the first 14 races, we're just trying to get into the final 10, but then the final four races, it goes from top 10 drivers to only the final four drivers who are able to win the title at the end of the year in the final race. Everyone races, but Those are the only four eligible drivers at the end of the year. So it was me, Logan Clampett, who I raced at the end of the race for the title, and then also Mitchell Young, as everyone knows Mitchell, I'm sure, and then Bobby Zelensky, who has also been competing in Porsche stuff. And, those 3 guys, Logan, Bobby, and Mitchell are all, very close, to, or are already at the pro level in Porsche, or other road series. And, I'm the kind of the odd guy out where I just focus on oval. It's kinda weird. But yeah, when you ask about strategy, you're totally right, where strategy makes a pretty big difference. I neglected to mention that earlier because, it's one thing to pass one car, but if you can pull a strategy off that's better than your competition and you pass 5 or 10 cars that way, that's huge. But the thing is, strategy is really determined by how the cautions fall in NASCAR. So whenever there's a crash, in real life, you gotta wave the yellow flag and slow the cars down. And we do, full course cautions no matter what. There's no such thing as a local yellow in NASCAR. So um, how those cautions fall determines when you want to pit, when you want to change tires, and that's something you can't plan before the race. You can kind of think about situations. You can at least look at your fuel range and also determine, okay, do I want to do full stints on fuel or do I want to come in and change tires earlier under green flag conditions? That's the kind of thing you work out before the race, but most of the stuff you're kind of acting on the fly because it's determined by those cautions.
And presumably also determined by what other people around you are doing. So, do you have a spotter? Do you have a human engineer watching in game, following other competitors, following what's going on, so that you can make the right call?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I missed the last part of your question there. And you're right. We do use some engineers. We call them crew chiefs. So mine's Matt Bontempi. He's someone I've known for a really long time, and we've worked together for a lot of years. And so he's my crew chief. He's also kind of my spotter. He's not telling me, there's cardio inside, cardio inside, cardio outside now, that sort of thing. I can see that, and I also have the computer spotter telling me that stuff. The computer spotter doesn't tend to make mistakes, so even though I very much trust my crew chief Matt on Tempe, I don't trust him as a spotter every time. I prefer to rely on that computer spotter. But yeah, so Matt does a lot of that strategy stuff. When my competitors are unexpectedly making a pit stop, or they're staying out longer than expected, he can let me know that. Other information about the race, like who's fast. For example, in the championship race, Logan Clampett was marching his way through the field. I was getting that information relayed to me by Matt, and he was letting me know lap times, and I kind of changed my strategy up a little bit depending on how he was running that race. So, again, these little edges make a lot of difference when it comes down to it when everyone's so close together. And I think my strategy calls at the end of the race made up the difference potentially in the half second that I was able to maintain over Logan at the end of the race.
Yeah, tiny margins. Um, Now, another thing that happens in the real world of NASCAR is that drivers kind of team up, whether they're actually in the same team or whether they just kind of buddy up because they're friendly with each other in the paddock. If you make enemies, then like we always have found in the old days of touring cars, then you can find yourself in the wall pretty quickly, and you can find yourself in all kinds of strife because it is so close that you kind of need the respect around you. How do you establish that when it's a virtual series where you're not hanging out with the drivers in the same room in the real world? Obviously, you are virtually, but how do you manage relationships so that you get treated well on track?
Yeah, there's a lot of unwritten rules when it comes to NASCAR racing. It's one thing to just crash somebody on purpose, but also just doing stupid moves that causes other people's races to get ended. That ruins your reputation. Uh, Luckily, I haven't had too many of those instances. I had one or two guys mad at me earlier this year, but it's minor stuff in the grand scheme of things. And if you wanna get raced well and you don't want to get doored, you don't want to get damaged through the race, you gotta command the respect that you deserve too, and and offer that to your competitors. So, I try to race the same way I would expect others to race me, aggressively when it comes down to it, but reserved when you're just at the start of a race and trying to be careful not to crash my own car, let alone my competitors too. So yeah, that's pretty important. Now, I would say that you were talking about how there's competitors that work together as well outside of the official teams. That's true. The reason for that is because there's a lot of preparation that goes into these races. So, for example, it just takes me a couple of hours to get used to an oval track. Admittedly, it's not too difficult to get around an oval track once you're used to how to drive them. One's much like the other. There's a few bumps and a few changes to the line that you got to work on, but it really comes down to having that sense of the tire limit and being able to maintain on it consistently, just like in a road course race. But what the preparation time really comes down to is setup building. So these cars are extremely complicated, very aero sensitive, and they're asymmetric. So we're only turning left, so you don't make a symmetric car with equal springs on all sides and 50% crossweight and that sort of stuff. You have to make the cars extremely asymmetric to optimize them for turning left, and that is much harder than it even sounds. There's so much that goes into the setups, and it takes so much man hours, and that's why there's a lot of alliances behind the scenes, is because people need not just one driver, one setup builder to make a car. Usually, it needs at least four people working hard on it to, attack a problem from multiple different angles. I'd say with Command SimSport and at least the Oval division with me, Mitchell, Bobby Zelensky, and Chris Shearburn, we're one of the smaller groups when it comes down to these technical alliances of total people working on a setup and preparing for races. But we think we're the best, and we showed that by having three of us make it into the playoffs. But of course, again, margins are super small, and one team can be strong one week, and another could be another week.
And you talk about the setup. Presumably now you've got somebody building the setup for you, but back in the day, getting to that point, getting into the world championship, if you like, you must have had a pretty in-depth understanding of how these setups work. How did you learn that? How do you find out? Because it isn't. It's so hard even to feel through trial and error how it works. So, what was kind of your method?
Yeah, actually, let me correct you on that a little bit because on our team specifically, the Coanda Some Sport Alliance for NASCAR, the four of us are the only four people that work on the setup each week. So it's
Ah,
four
okay.
drivers and four setup builders, and it's one and the same. Now, that was a dream and like a vision I had for the perfect team because my my imagination, my philosophy here is uh, as competition gets harder and harder, you know, setups become closer and closer, the edges get smaller and smaller, and a setup builder has to be an extremely good driver as well in order to find those small little differences in lap time. Someone that's driving even a tenth off per lap isn't going to feel when the setup's been improved a hundredth of a second. And those hundredths, I'm not exaggerating. That's what we're chasing is hundredths each time.
Yeah.
So yeah, the four of us, that's it. We don't have a dedicated setup builder. It's just us four. Um, so yeah, sorry. I guess I focus too much on racing and stuff, and I haven't exercised my memory well enough. What was the second part of your question there that I can help answer?
How did you learn how to set up these cars when they're so
Right. Yeah.
complex?
So yeah, you're definitely right. That getting into the series is just as dependent on your setup building skills as being in the series. So that's something that I kind of was I became known for is like, I'm a good driver, but I became known as the setup builder guy that pushes the limits and finds crazy stuff that works. Um, so, through the years, like starting in 2015, I guess I started working on the setups really hard and pushing the limits and making the best setups on the service for certain tracks. And eventually, like some years, we would have crazy setups. Like, for example, in 2018, the speed was starting the ride heights up extremely high to get past tech inspection with a lot more camber. So as the front end traveled down, the tires kind of squatted out and you'd get more camber out of the right front tire. And that was extremely fast, worth a lot of speed. And we were the first to really perfect that. and it was a huge advantage. Now, this year, that's not really as much of an advantage. So there's not really any crazy setup things. So it's really about fine tuning. But yeah, building up my skills through the year and really focusing on setup stuff really paid off. It there's no other excuse than just putting a lot of time into something to get better at it. I started off by just watching YouTube videos of people who were doing setup building seminars. So the late David Cater was probably the first one that I watched. Really, really grateful for his work and making stuff so clear and really being the first guy to put out that sort of content back in the day. But, over time, just asking people that were willing to share information and building up my own knowledge. Plus, I studied physics, so that kind of helped uh, with that sort of mindset. But yeah, so I was going through university at the same time doing meteorology. So yeah, a lot of
Wow.
work, a lot of careful thought, and I would say avoiding bias because I hear it so much doing
Yeah.
coaching with VRS that people come up with these ideas. Okay, you need to get the tire pressures equal. Why? It's just some random rule that someone came up with. Oh, you need to get the tire temperatures across the center and inside edge of the tire the same. Oh, that's not a rule. So that sort of thing, like people get stuck on hard rules, and that limits their ability to expand their knowledge if they get preconceived ideas that might
But
be
I
wrong.
also imagine if you gave your setup to a real NASCAR team, uh,
Mhm.
I imagine that it wouldn't necessarily work in the real world. And is that where those biases come from? Because people read up about the logic behind, not running too much camber so that you don't wear out the inside of a tire so it goes pop. But might not necessarily do that on iRacing, and so there's a different approach. And in fact, not just iRacing, across all the different platforms that there is sim racing, you can do things you can't do in the real world.
Yeah, it is what it is in sim racing, right? We're simulating the world, and just like I mentioned, I do meteorology and studied that. Um, Meteorology is all simulation now. We simulate the atmosphere uh, to try to predict what the weather will be in a week, and it's not perfect, and it can't be because it's so infinitely complex that computers can't keep up, and our math can't quite keep up sometimes. So yeah, in iRacing, I would say the biggest reason that setups are different in iRacing compared to real life isn't necessarily the physics. It's what we're starting with and what the tech inspection limits are. So at least in NASCAR, like
Hmm.
we've got certain tech inspection limits and we've got certain things we can do to the car to adjust the balance. In real life, a lot of the stuff that we're doing and trying to solve on iRacing would be solved by changing suspension arms and getting past tech inspection in really weird ways and really complex aerodynamic effects that maybe aren't simulated in iRacing. That's where the differences lie, and I don't fault iRacing at all for being a little off base on certain setup parameters. But really, um, the same things we're going for are the same things in real life. It's not chasing tire temperatures. It's not chasing tire pressures. It's not chasing certain ride heights through the corner. It's chasing lap time. So that's what I do.
Hmm.
I make an adjustment, see if it improves the lap time. That's extremely simplified, of course, but you know the real number to look at is lap time. You want it to go down.
And to be honest, the only way you can do that is to be at the kind of level that yourself and the world champion elite are in any form of motorsport. Because if I try and do that, chasing a setup, my consistency of driving, even on an oval, is still not good enough to actually be able to go, that was better, that was worse. Because actually, lap per lap, the driving might not be quite as good. So you
Right.
are in a privileged position to be able to do that. I want to move away quickly because I know that this could go on forever if we just wax lyrical. It's very interesting stuff. Why NASCAR? Why iRacing? Where did it come from in the first place? Were you a NASCAR fan when you were younger?
Yeah. And just to add on to that last point, I guess just that's what took me so long to get into setup building as well, is because I had to improve my driver skills too, just like you're mentioning. It's hard to feel that stuff. So yeah, I was a NASCAR fan all the way since the beginning. Like that's one of my first memories was watching Jeff Gordon stuck in the grass in his rainbow car for some reason, and then he became my favorite driver. That's how kids' memories work. We kind of link stuff together when they're probably not related, but for some reason, Jeff Gordon became my favorite driver, whether or not it was because he crashed that particular race or not, I don't know. But yeah, I've always been a NASCAR fan. Never really any other form of motorsport until recently. I'm a huge Formula One fan now. I love it. Probably because a lot of the stuff I was talking about earlier on, about finding incremental improvements and engineering the cars and that sort of stuff. That's what I like about F1. I love watching the whole story, not just the race, not just the drivers. I like to watch how the cars are developed through the year. That's super cool to me. Um, but yeah, I was always a NASCAR fan, and that's probably why I got into sim racing as well. I was playing Forza Motorsport from 2008 to 2013, I guess. The new Xbox came out, and my wheel wasn't supported on the Xbox One, so I decided to move over to PC because I had a gaming PC, and I looked for the best. I looked up racing sim with NASCAR in it. That was iRacing. So I jumped into iRacing. Luckily, I made the right choice because definitely the best platform, I would say, for sim racing and especially NASCAR stuff. Um, but yeah, from then on, I just started in 2013, and the rest of the story.
There other NASCAR games do exist, but they're definitely not as good. Especially the one I used to play back in the day.
Well, they're
What was
not
that?
as
Like
simulation.
EA
They're
Sports.
good. They're good in their own way, I would say, but they're not sims.
No, no, exactly. And what are your guilty pleasures on iRacing then? Obviously, NASCAR has become kind of your professional way of going about things. Do we find you doing ovals, the Monza oval in a Dallara IndyCar, or are you doing circuit stuff? You said you like Formula One. Are you trying out the Williams on there?
My guilty pleasure is putting this bad boy up to 100% force feedback, uh, making a lot of work for the motor and running Nürburgring Lotus 79, probably the highest, craziest force feedback thing in the game, and push that thing to the limit and push my arms to the limit a little bit too. But yeah, I like running the Nürburgring. I'm not good at it. I just like doing it. It's nice to play iRacing and not be worried about lap time. It's a good time.
It gives you an appreciation as to why the racing drivers of those days looked so different to the Formula One drivers we have now. They were all kind of butch back in the day, and now they're all skinny jockeys because they needed to be, didn't they, to muscle those cars around the track.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. Without power steering back in the day, it was even worse. But yeah, I just like the Lotus 79, I guess, on iRacing because I don't think there is any sort of power steering. Maybe there's a little bit, but like when you hit a curb, it's gonna, it's it's an instant spike of force feedback, and it's really fun because when you're driving around, you can't just be smooth with your wheel. You have to be extremely active all the way through the corner, and like even down the straightaway, you can barely hold the thing straight. So I just love it. It's fun.
And we just got a quick glimpse of your rig there. Where is
Mhm.
that seat from?
Yeah, sure. Here, I'll give you a better glimpse of it now. So, uh, I was smashing on my VRS Direct Force Pro wheelbase. I've got their pedals underneath as well. My cable's not long enough to show you right now. Triple monitors, they're just the cheapest ones I could find, honestly. They're 1080p ones. I might upgrade later. But the seat itself is out of my uncle's old Oldsmobile 2003 something Alero. So it's just an old car seat, and then my frame is made out of wood. I made that myself with my dad, and we painted it black. Eventually gonna get the
Wow.
VRS rig as well. Probably retire the old Oldsmobile seat, but nothing special here. This is just my DIY rig with some fancy pants wheel and pedals, honestly. But rest of it's pretty simple.
What happened to the rest of the car?
Oh, that's junk at this point. That was a parts car to begin with.
Amazing. That's absolute proof that you can be a world champion. You do not need 15, 20, 30,000. euros, pounds, dollars worth of sim racing equipment. Although, your wheel and pedals are top spec. You don't
Yeah, they're
necessarily
they're a
need
thousand
a
each roughly,
fireproof
all
seat.
in. Yeah, probably a grand
Oh, that's
to
not too
get
bad.
the whole. Yeah, they're well. VRS is. I'm not trying to make this into an ad, but like VRS is meant to be top quality, but also as low price margins as possible. So it's meant to be the clear choice for that sort of stuff. But yeah, I wanted to keep the cost down when I first started on iRacing. I was a poor college student, and I started off with Logitech wheel and pedals. And if you're, I'd say most people watching your show are already very much into sim racing. But if you are just getting started, um, Logitech wheel and pedals are great to start off with. They're 300 bucks if you can find them on sale, and that's what I got into the Coke series with. That's what Logan Clampett almost beat me with. He finished second in the championship this year. And, you know, I would say if you're really going for performance and money's not an issue, go for a direct drive and nice pair of pedals, perhaps like mine. And uh, beyond that, that's just chasing hundredths and tenths, really. What do you think, Ben? Do you think direct drive and like high end equipment is an advantage on the roadside?
Oh, I do the questions. Can't believe that I'm being asked. Um, Honestly, I think it gives you a small advantage, but I don't think it's the be all and end all for enjoyment. But certainly a pedal, a brake pedal for me makes a huge difference. The
Yep,
feel
I
and
echo your thoughts
and the.
completely.
I mean, maybe
I
not
totally
necessarily in
agree.
NASCAR so much because you're never really touching the brakes.
Certain tracks you do, and we do a few road courses through the year. We've had 3 road courses, so that matters. And
Okay.
Bobby and Mitchell obviously are dominating those for the most part. Um, Mitchell won 2 of them, and he should have won the third, but uh, Graham pulled off some really nice strategy and held him off. But yeah, the brake especially, you're right, helps a lot. Maintaining like threshold braking and being
Yeah.
consistent on your brakes is pretty important on road. But yeah, the force feedback gives you a little edge. I would say it's a tenth. What do you think? Tenth of a second on road?
Depends on the track.
Yeah, certainly.
One last question: what happens next, Keegan? Because you've got championships in your pocket. You've proven you're the best in the world in NASCAR. Do you go and try and do something different? Do you try and go into circuit racing, or are you just trying to be the best in ovals on iRacing? Period. Forever.
Yeah, so I won the championship this year, but that isn't to say that I don't have room for improvement. So, I'm going into next year trying to back it up with a second championship. I've made it into the playoffs, the final 8 or the final 10 in the 4 years I've raced so far, but was only able to pull the championship off once. So it goes to show how you got to have a little bit of luck too, and you got to be the best to really make it to the end. So I've got room to improve, especially my road course stuff. I'm running around 10th in these road course races we do, and NASCAR is trending more towards road racing and also short tracks, which hasn't always been my cup of tea. So I've got some work to do to you know make sure I can compete at the top level next year as well. And beyond that, you know, I do a lot of VRS work, trying to do a lot of coaching. That's fun. That's my day job. VRS and iRacing and NASCAR are allowing me to commit to sim racing full time. So that's really nice for me. But beyond that, just trying to keep up with my hobbies. I want to start learning the guitar. We were talking a little bit before this podcast interview here that I'm learning French a little bit. So skills outside of sim racing is fun to improve on as well. And I'm ended up spending most of the last few weekends home brewing some beer. So that's been my hobby
Cool.
recently too, getting into some home brew. But so just some stuff outside of sim racing keeps me sane, I guess. But a lot of work will go into NASCAR next year, and especially the road course stuff.
I love that. I love that there's a world outside of sim racing for you. That's really cool, and you can even predict the weather. So that's even better. Thank you so much for joining us, Keegan. It's been absolutely illuminating, and actually we could have spoken for way longer than we have already. Although I think we've probably gone longer than many of our interviews over the last couple of weeks. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem, Ben. Thanks everyone. Thanks everyone at VCO.
Just a reminder then that we do have the VCO Simi Awards coming up and only a few weeks left of voting. There is an oval section that we've added to it, and Keegan is one of the drivers that could be voted for as the best oval racer out there. So obviously already proven it on track, winning the championship, and a fantastic, interesting chat. Remember, you can also listen to all of these VCO Esports studios on your favourite podcast provider. If you don't want to look at my ugly face, you can just listen, which is perhaps even better. There are over 60 different drivers, organisers, and various other celebrities of the sim racing world on there. So very, very much worth having a listen. Thank you very much for joining us. Until next time, enjoy your sim racing. Bye-bye.